Welcome back to the second part of the video on social responsibility and stakeholder analysis. So what do we mean by social responsibility? We mean the recognition that businesses have an impact on society and the consideration that understanding and recognizing that impact is very important. Social responsibility also costs money, but at the same time could be beneficial for businesses because how socially responsible a firm acts may impact the decisions of customers and other actors to do or to continue to do businesses with this company. An important topic when we talk about social responsibility is the topic of stakeholders. So, what are stakeholders? They are different from the owners. The owners are the actors that invest money. They are important, of course. Without their capital, the company couldn't have existed in the first place. However, there are more people that are affected and affect the company, and those are the stakeholders. So, the stakeholders are any actors that affect and are affected by the organization. We talk about internal stakeholders that belong directly to the organization, and the external stakeholders, like for instance suppliers, customers, government, creditors, and in general the shareholders that do not work for the organization in a daily basis. So when we think about business ethics, we think about all the impacts that the businesses have to the stakeholders. There have been many scandals and many crises in which different stakeholders are forgotten by the organization. For instance, the scandals in which Nike was involved when we found out about the conditions in which children were working. Also, the very poor conditions in some of the factories for Apple. The more recent scandals in which Volkswagen was involved because they were lying about the gas detection of the cars. And also very close to South Korea, the tragedy with the sunken ferry here 2 years ago, in which business people were at fault. So in these cases and in many others, businesses tend to forget that they are having tremendous impact to many different stakeholders. So that's why it's important for companies to understand who the stakeholders are and what the impact are. So this is one framework. There are more to understand and to kind of classify the stakeholders according to different criteria. So here we have on the one hand power, going from low to high, the power that the stakeholder has, and the other one is the interest that the stakeholder has, also go from low to high. So we have here 4 types of stakeholders that the company kind of can in this way understand and kind of differently deal with 4 types of stakeholders. So when the stakeholder is very powerful and is very interested and has a lot of stake on the company should keep closely in contact with this type of stakeholder. Also, if the stakeholder is very powerful but have low interest, the company needs to keep satisfying this stakeholder. But this is one way of looking at stakeholders. There are other ways of looking at stakeholders, and you will see in other of your courses how to do this stakeholder analysis. Here I have an example of the different stakeholders that a business school could have. And for instance, Solbridge has recognized that a very important external stakeholder is these accrediting bodies. In this case, many of you have seen the accreditation that Solbridge got, the AACSB accreditation. So this accrediting body is very important and can affect Solbridge in a very profound way. So businesses have not been paying attention to their impacts from the beginning. There has been an evolution in terms of the priorities of these social and environmental impacts. So here in this graph, we kind of see some of the stages that, for instance, countries like the United States and companies in this country have been going through, starting from a defensive approach and arriving to a more systematic approach in which social responsibility and social impacts are understood and kind of minimized, especially the negative impacts, and kind of maximize the positive impacts. But The point here is that there has been an evolution, and it's not the first instinct of companies to be socially responsible. Especially where companies are left free, it has been understood that companies do not tend to prioritize social impacts and environmental impacts. So there has to be some kind of intervention or some kind of encouragement for companies to get closer to developing positive impacts for the society that they are embedded. So the idea is that it's not the first instinct of these companies, but some companies do recognize that there are some benefits to positive impacts in society. Two of the views of social responsibility are the economic model, in which the idea is that society will benefit most when businesses are left alone to produce what they know what to produce. And the idea is that social responsibility is someone else's job. The firms will assume the responsibility through paying taxes and in a very indirect way. On the contrary, in the socioeconomic model, companies should emphasize not only profits, but they also should understand the impact that their decisions have on the society. Here, we're talking about very proactive ways to minimize the negative impacts and kind of maximize the positive impacts. These two approaches can be also graphed or put on a more continuum, going from a very low social responsibility, which corresponds to the economic model, to a very high social responsibility, which corresponds to the socioeconomic model. In this case, companies are proactive and they are always trying to develop good products and embracing socially responsible behavior, going out of their way to learn about the needs of different stakeholders and satisfying these needs. In the middle, we see the defensive approach, kind of building on the laws, not going below the law, and the accommodative approach. Companies behave legally and ethically and try to balance the interests of different stakeholders and kind of trying to do a little bit more than in the only defensive approach. So which model out of these four models would you advise to companies to follow when we are talking about the impacts that they have in the society? A proactive, accommodative, defensive, or obstructionist approach? Leave your comments here in the YouTube channel. So finally, some of the key current topics that business people and governments and associations and different actors in the society are discussing are related to these four topics: consumerism's rights, employment practices, environmental impacts, and social sustainability. When we talk about consumer rights, we're talking about rights like safety, be informed, right to choose, the right to be heard. So companies and actors are trying to promote these rights. When we talk about employment practices, we're talking about how, for instance, minorities are treated, what opportunities women have in order to advance in their careers in different companies. In terms of the environment, companies are discussing how they affect and how they pollute water, air, and even noise. And here the question is, who do you think should pay for a clean environment? Businesses or individuals through tax payment? Also, please leave your comments in the YouTube space for comments. And finally, social sustainability. Here, companies and government institutions are trying to look at the long-term impact and survival of different initiatives related to being socially responsible. Here, it is important the commitment of top management and the owners of companies. Without this commitment, social initiatives within a business usually does not survive. One question here is also who pays for these initiatives? So this is it for the second video on chapter 2. This is where I am taking the materials. Thank you for watching and see you in the classroom.